Okay, welcome, welcome. Thank you guys for taking the time to join us today and to sort of be on this call together to talk about the wisdom of bears and to join me in this conversation with Meghan. My name is Koelle, for any of you who don't know me. And yeah, I guess maybe a quick thing to share is that probably like many of you, from the time I was very young, nature was always that safe place that I could turn to. And animals, well, they just kind of always captured my imagination. I was so deeply fascinated about what they were doing and why they were doing it. And I can remember, as a kid saying to my mom, well, what happens to them at night? Like, where are they sleeping? Where did everybody go? Like, where is their bed? And so just that curiosity and natural desire to be to sort of understand that larger web, that larger family that we're all a part of. And I think as children, probably many of us are kind of are naturally oriented to be curious in that way. And I'm sure Meghan could speak to that more as well. But for me, that journey took me into learning and a great deal from horses. I went into kind of having a lot of childhood trauma and seeking out animals as a safe escape from people. And for those of you who know my story, forgive me for the repeat, but essentially, horses became kind of like a teacher, a guide, a mentor for me. And I became obsessed with learning about how horses are able to navigate trauma. And then that took me into a deep curiosity of like, oh, gosh, I'm not able to do that very well. How on earth do they do that? How are they able to go through really difficult, overwhelming experiences and a little while later be present enough to really re-engage in their environment and connect with one another? And so that set me on a long journey of really both seeking to understand all the aspects of trauma and how the ripple effects that has in our lives and how that impacts our capacity for connection and intimacy with each other. And also the roadmap that animals are offering to us about a way of being, and how to, a way of engaging and being with each other and really understanding our innate capacity for resilience. So that's a little bit about me. I'm super excited to have Meghan Walla-Murphy here with me and running this retreat together. And so I'd love, Meghan, if you wouldn't mind just sharing, anything that feels relevant to you, just a brief introduction on your journey, if that's okay.
Okay, well, thank you, Koelle, and thanks for hearing your story. And welcome each of you, and thanks for taking the time to arrive here in this so bizarre moment we find ourselves in, where we're like, oh, we're all in different places, but we're also all here together. So I find that just so interesting, and just to take a moment to let whatever is happening outside of this next hour to drop away so we can really be here together and listening to the ambient sounds around us, or the smells and the temperature. We're coming from all over the world sometimes, in the country. So I'm thankful that you're here to learn about something that's not human, and how it makes us truly what we are as human. So my name is Meghan Walla-Murphy, and people often ask me, they're like, well, what do you do? And I'm like, I don't really know what it is that I do in a quick like elevator pitch. So you're going to get a little bit of a longer story. My background is really that I track animals. I spend a lot of time following them in the old school way, that kind of arcane way that all of your ancestors once did. So all of you come from a place of tracking. I'm 100% certain that someone in your legacy was able to track, because otherwise your genetics would not have survived, right? You had to be able to track the weather, the plants, the animals, how to find shelter. So all of this is well within our legacy. And I follow them by their footprints and the sign that they use. I have worked on, collaring projects before, but I'm more interested in the non-invasive methods. But it's been a long journey, certainly. And like Koelle, grew up with all kinds of different family dynamics and trauma. And my escape, which I think lots of us when we're kids, is you just go outside and you hang out. And I recently got married, and my husband, when I first met him 8 years ago, he was like, "You trust the plants and the animals more than humans." And I was like, "Yes, of course. Doesn't everybody?" It turns out, no, that's not the situation, but I certainly did, because I found the humans to be much more erratic and not as dependable as the tree that was always there to sit in. And so I think as kids, we innately go there, and then there's high school and jobs and work and relationships that pulls us away from that. And I did get pulled away for a little bit, but again, just through other, not so nice stories, came back into that world of tracking animals, and was deeply soothed by them, and have spent now 23 years really on this tracking journey. And the bears are so compelling for me. I really love all the animals, but there's a way in which humans and bears meet that it sparks me like no other animal. And I mean, something really interesting, and I think this is part of it, is if you were to, and I know this sounds a little grotesque, but just go with me. If you were to have a skeleton of a human and a skeleton of a bear side by side without their heads on, you would not be able to tell the difference, with the exception of like one knuckle that's in their toes is different between a human skeleton and a bear skeleton. And that gives you like, oh, no wonder why there are so many earthly and universal stories about bears and humans shape-shifting and this relationship. One of the oldest stories in the world comes from Europe, well, what we now call Europe, the Great Bear Mother, which she was the mother of all humans. And that story is in Korea, it's in what we now call Russia, it's all over North America. And so there's this kind of intertwining, and I found that bears helped me to find my humanity really deeply. And they also just allowed me to eat and eat and eat, because bears love to eat and they like to sleep. So they have taught me a lot about how do I just take care of myself and enjoy those indulgences. Or maybe they're not indulgence, maybe there's survival tactics, we'll call them. I'm happy to answer more questions about my work and all of that stuff, but I don't know that you need to know that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Meghan. Meghan and I, we met as a result of shared friendships through trackers in the South African bushveld. And it was such a delight when we first met. We met by wandering around, actually in the area we're going to be doing this retreat, and we connected and met in Tahoe, California, and just spending a few minutes with Meghan, just wandering through a forest, and I was experiencing her pointing out plants for teas and just aspects of what's happening in the disturbances of the soil or what's going on with the trees, and I was instantly like, oh yeah, I love you. We're going to be great friends. And one of the things that I, really rang in my ears, it just really stuck with me when we first met, was the way that Meghan spoke about bears and spoke about their, just how much they embody self-care. And, I thought to myself, okay, when the timing is right, we're going to do a retreat program together, because self-care is something that in this culture and our human experience has been talked about and sort of framed in a way as being indulgent, as we're more praised and encouraged to do a tremendous amount of multitasking, right? Like answer your text messages promptly, get to all your emails in the day, handle everything you've got to do for your family, be on top of all of your work. Oh, by the way, work out, find some time for meditation in there somewhere. And hopefully you get outside. We have so much pressure and so many things happening in our daily lives. And there's such a like a cultural expectation that you should be able to multitask all of those things and feel in harmony or feel in balance. And the more that you can accomplish and get done in your day, then, cheers to you, the better you are. And for me, I have always looked to the rest of our animal kin as a sort of a shining light or a guide on how would we move through the world if we didn't have this cultural construct, if we weren't born into these stories and this sense of pressure. And is there another way that we would be embodied? Is there another way that we would, function together, or how we would move through the world, or how we might think about things, or even understanding what our bodies are capable of, what we're capable of doing? Now we live inside buildings, and we keep our thermostat set to a certain temperature, and we, have food easily. And so just out of curiosity, like, what is our actual capacity, and what the world look like? Obviously, it's questions that are really fun to ponder, and we have to kind of marry that beautiful innate capacity and intelligence that we experience from nature with the reality of the current age and the technologies that we're living in at this time. So I do find it really helpful to sort of always go back and return to that essential wisdom that's surrounding all of us, and providing some kind of guidance for how do we actually live on this planet in a state of harmony. How do we begin to think about what it means to take care of ourselves, what it means to take care of ourselves in such a way that we can show up to really support the next generation that's coming through. So, with some of that was our motivation. Meghan and I got together and said, okay, let's take some time and create this safe container where we can get together as a small group and really listen and ponder some of those questions and submerge ourselves into Bear's way of life, and start to see, what can we learn together from that, and what do we have the courage to begin to support each other in implementing? What small steps can we start to take? So, Meghan, let's take a little bit of time to talk about, you have so much insight and so much wisdom with bears, that I would love to kind of take some time to talk with you about some of that. And then, in maybe 20 minutes or 30 minutes or so, we'll open it up and let you guys share any questions that you might have. So Meghan, you've talked a little bit. We did that podcast interview a month or so ago, and you were talking in there about the way that bears create ancestral trails, and your discovery of that. And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more to that, and what you've learned about it, and what that represents to you.
Yeah, great. So like I said, I've been tracking animals for a long time. And bears were on my radar, as, teddy bears, and they're everywhere, right? As you start, bear claw pastries. And as soon as you start to look, you're like, wow, bears are everywhere. But what really hooked me, I was in the Berkshire Mountains tracking. It was a little bit after I had gotten divorced, and my life kind of became like a country western song, and I had quit my job. We sold our house, my dog died, and I bought a truck, and I was driving around the country for the express purpose of tracking. And I landed in the Berkshires, and I had met up with a couple who was taking me out tracking, and we walked up to this thing that they were calling an ancestral bear trail. And I had heard vaguely about this. And we got there, and I don't know if you can think about that moment right when the sun is setting and there's this like awe that comes over you, or you walk into an art gallery and there's a beautiful piece of artwork and everyone is hushed in that room. And that's every time I come on one of these ancestral bear trails, that is the feeling. It's almost like walking into a cathedral. And what they are, and mama bears will teach their young about these trails, but they're trails that have been used generation upon generation, that the bears will specifically heavily mark. So when a mama bear comes on this area, let's say she doesn't have a cub right now, she will make sure that she steps in all of the footprints of all the bears that have gone before her. And if she's a little bear, she'll extend her stride to make sure. And if she's a big bear, she'll shorten her stride to make sure she's stepping exactly in those footprints. And then if she does have a cub, she'll teach them about that ancestral trail. And what blows me away is no one really knows why. There's a lot of theories. Is it food? Is it reproduction? But there'll be apparently some of them, they're like 3 feet deep in Alaska. I've found ones that are, 6 to 7 inches deep over and over again. And they've been caught on, bears have been caught on those wildlife camera videos where they actually pop their elbows and their joints to make sure that they're stomping in them and then rubbing their feet. So it's very purposeful action. And when I came on this, I was like, oh, there's so much here that I just don't know, that I don't understand. And I think for me, that's one of the marvelous things about being outside is it's humble, but it's also very generous. Nature has this like way of holding and caring for you, and also being like, yeah, you don't really know anything out here, and everybody's just kind of working it out with each other. And it begs for me to slow down and listen. Because when I am moving in my head and I'm like, well, that's what an ancestral bear trail is, and I'm going to measure, and this is what the statistics say, I miss the whole point entirely, right? Because I'm going in with a concept that I know something, but if I can surrender to the fact that my only job and my only work here right now is to witness and to listen and then respond, it becomes exceptional, the information that I receive. And I think certainly bears, but almost all wildlife or trees is really waiting for humans, these modern humans that we now have become, to re-enter that kind of dialogue and conversation. And I think in that, I know for me personally, there's tremendous healing there from the trauma that I've had. And it always comes when I allow myself spaciousness and I'm not multitasking. And often in some situations, if I'm multitasking while I'm out there, I've actually put myself in a dangerous position where I or another animal might be harmed because I am too busy and I'm in my monkey mind versus in my human body. So those ancestral bear trails, they're remarkable. They're all over the country right now. If you have bear, I don't know where you're all coming from, but if you have bears where you are, they're probably there because that's what they do. Bears, that's one of the things they do, is leave these trails. And one other thing, Koelle, before we move on, is I think, these trails have lots of different names. Some people call them stomp trails or ritual trails or traditional trails. But I tend to stick with the ancestral trail name because there's something beautiful to think that, like, oh, humans aren't the only ones with ancestors, right? But to also firmly place ourselves in these ancestral bodies. Not only are you, one of your ancestors was thinking about you in the work that they did, but you are also somebody's ancestor. Like, I don't have children, but I will be someone's ancestor for the care that I have on this land and for the legacy that I leave behind. And so I love that thought of like, oh, the bears are doing it for generations. Like, how much can we learn from them? So
I love that too. It's just sitting and reflecting and really becoming aware that that's happening. It makes me very curious about all the ways in which that's happening throughout the entire sort of language of nature. And we don't know it, right? Or we don't know how to recognize it. But I maybe some of you have heard of this book. I feel like I maybe posted it on social media a while back. There's a book called The Good Ancestor, and it's beautifully written. And a follow-up podcast to that was called The Long Time Academy. And it resonates so deeply with me, what you're saying, Meghan, because we don't often think about ourselves as ancestors. We don't often think about, like, how is the way that I'm moving through the world, or the things I'm doing, or the choices I'm making, or the healing that's happening for me.
Exactly.
How is that going to impact the next person that I engage with, or if it's children or family members, or friends of family or something like that. And so I think as a result of so much pressure, and a result of a lot of generational trauma that has been passed down, we've become more narrowly focused on the basic things we need to do to survive. And in that, I mean, I talk about this often, but one of the key elements of trauma that we don't tend to talk about as trauma is this idea that we have to do something or be something in order to be good enough to deserve love and belonging. And when we're really little, hopefully most of us don't receive that message. But kind of as soon as we start to get into the structure of school, it begins to be, in order for you to get this, that, or the other, or my attention, or the gold star, or the whatever, you need to follow and do these things and check off this, these particular set of markers. And it sets up an internal framework of, like, oh, I constantly need to prove myself. And so I think it's so good for us to both look at our history in our own personal lives, and also to stay curious about the history we've adopted from our families. And to, I'm just imagining being a bear. Like, if I know that history and I understand how it's living in me, what's the imprint that I'm going to leave? Like, what is now we're going to, with every generation, it changes a little bit. And so what is that imprint that I'm going to leave on the earth? And for me, that is represented relationally, in terms of how we connect with each other, and the love and care and attunement that we offer each other. So yeah, I love that. Thank you. I have such a visual of the ancestral trails now. You talked a little bit about bears being in our history, kind of across the globe. Can you say a little bit more about what you understand about the human relationship with bears?
Yeah, I think I'll start broad, though, is animals as teachers, right? There is, in all human cultures, however far you go back, the stories that you hear and you start, it's, oh, the animals before humans, right? And then the humans came, we were like the youngest, we're the newbies, we're the babies of the animal world. And it was the animals that were teaching the humans how to be on the planet, and then things go awry. But those stories exist all around the world. And what's lovely, bears are all across the Northern Hemisphere. And almost every culture that I have been able to find that's in the Northern Hemisphere, within tribe or village or whatever nomenclature they're putting on their organization, there were bear clans, and there were bear people, and there were bear medicine people, and there were bear dances. And so there's this long legacy within the Northern Hemisphere of bears and humans and their interrelationship. And I have continued to go deeper and deeper and deeper into this study, not just by being and hanging out, by tracking bears, but by reading about these stories and going back. The bears taught us how to stay warm in the winter. They taught us what foods that we could eat. They taught us the medicines. I mean, how many of you are familiar with OSHA root? It's a big, root. Often it's called bear root. It's the bears that have taught the humans in North America about this root. I mean, even myself tracking, so bears, just so you know, they move from their noses, and their noses are led by their bellies. So if they're hungry, they're following their nose to like fill their bellies, which is probably why I love them. But I lost my train of thought. But so while I'm tracking them, they're also very efficient food eaters. Like they're just the perfect, refrigerator kind of. And they leave this scat that has just exactly what they ate. You can tell. And I have learned, even I was tracking them and I knew they eat ripe manzanita berries. But the other day I came on one and there was like, they were unripe and green manzanita berries. And I was like, oh, that's food. And I started eating them and they are delicious. And that's just like, here I am in my like 40-year-old body or whatever. And but if you can imagine, thousands of years of oral tradition passing on what the bears have taught, your lexicon of bear food, medicine, living relationship becomes really broad. So that's just one kind of aspect of that question. Well,
that's amazing. Again, I love sitting with that sort of question of what have we been through so many generations learning from these animals, and in just the last few generations have been somewhat lost or cut off from that. And I think it's not that difficult to begin to open ourselves back up and to allow ourselves to take another step of courage and submerge ourselves into these environments with support, with guides, with people who have spent that kind of time, and begin to see what is the conversation that's happening. You and I have also talked a little bit about how bears are, like all animals, they're very good at being themselves. There's no seeking of approval from some sort of cultural framework, and within that, their way of exploring and moving with what's happening in the landscape, and being able to be with what's going on, and to navigate those changes, and also the way in which they tend to cultivate diversity by just simply being themselves. And I'd love to hear you speak more to that. It's such a I can remember when you first spoke about it, I thought, oh my goodness, that right there is such a profound lesson, to be able to start to glean, oh yeah, the more that I can actually trust in the intelligence of my own body and have the courage to be more and more, who I feel I essentially am, it starts to form out a very different environment and a different ability to navigate that environment. So I'm curious what you've witnessed in bears, on this front, and anything you've learned about that for yourself.
yeah. So I'm going to go kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, but if you all just go with me on the ride, it'll get there, I promise. So there's this thing called the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. I know it's kind of a mouthful. And I think if you can just ride with that. The first place I ever heard it, Robin Wall Kimmerer, in her first book called Gathering Moss, which came out like 20 years before what she's now known for is Braiding Sweetgrass. And I had been experiencing this. And basically, the intermediate disturbance hypothesis is in those ecosystems that have disturbance that's not extractive, like mining or nuclear waste, but that's also not touched, right? So the kind of leave no trace, don't disturb it, you're not part of nature, is also a disturbance. It's just on the other side of the spectrum, right? Both of those simplify our ecosystems and they actually decrease biodiversity. But when you're in this sweet spot of intermediate disturbance, which would be like, if you can imagine a tide pools in a tidal zone, or like marshes and lake edges, or where grasslands transition into forests and oak woodlands, those like areas where there's these disturbances, that come in, or where there's overlap, that is where the diversity is high. So let's just take a tide pool situation. There's times when things are completely underwater, and disturbed by the current. And then there's these times when they're being crashed upon. And then there's times when they're completely exposed to the sunlight, but they're not horrific disturbances, but they're disturbances enough to have those species adapt to a tremendous different kind of climate, right? Or situation. And so now if you were to think about that in your own life, think about those moments when maybe you've had a disturbance, right? There are the disturbances that are so traumatic that they can lay you down, but there's also the kind of disturbances of like, oh, you've taken a new job, or you're moving, or a relationship is starting or ending, and they're like these changes in your routine, and they're begging of you to change a little bit and to adapt to a new situation, which is increasing diversity in your own lexicon and being. So bears they are a disturbance. If any of you have lived in bear country, you're like, oh, I got to deal with this big disturbance, which is begging you to learn new tactics of how to interface with wildlife. But they also need diversity to survive and to be healthy. And when we simplify our systems, like fire suppression, which has happened pretty much everywhere west of the Mississippi, you only get conifers, and you lose all of these food systems, right? And this is like crazy ecology, but they need diversity for themselves to thrive. So where there are healthy bear populations that stay in the wild, they become these icons of diversity and necessity of diversity in your life. The other thing that I really like bears and diversity for me, so as I said, bears are like these perfect food collectors. From when they come out of their sleep, their torpor, it's not quite a hibernation, they are on the wake for food. Like that's what they do 24/7. They're like, eat, 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 eat. And that is their routine until winter comes. And then we get this disturbance, right? They're like, wow, I'm really tired. I put on a tremendous amount of weight. I'm going to shift the routine. I'm going to disturb the rut that I have been in, and I'm going to go to sleep. And the thing that's so brilliant about it, and this kind of comes back to this universality and cultural aspect, is bears all around the world have this, they're a metaphor for birth and death and regeneration. Because so what happens in winter, they go away. They're not on the landscape anymore. And so they're this amazing representative of death, but they've also changed their routine. And then if you're a female, you come out in spring and you have 2 cubs. So now not only have you changed the routine, you've disturbed the norm, you've gone into this state of death, literally. I mean, they're out. She births these 2 cubs totally asleep, and then they crawl up her belly and breastfeed from her. So then they come out and there's this tremendous life. And so in this disruption of their own routine and this disturbance, they come out with this higher kind of regeneration and diversity of life and all of that. And so bears need a lot of different food sources, so diversity of food. I mean, we could go on and on, but I don't know if that quite answered your question. It was a long way around, but intermediate disturbance, it's good. It's kind of it brings diversity. So disturb yourselves a little bit.
Oh, I think it is really good. That you definitely answered the question. And it also reminds me too, both in the spectrum of continuing to introduce mild stressors, or being able to navigate mild stressors, and on the other end of the spectrum, being able to really lean into rest and play. And so I think for many of us, that can be, we tend to, in our human world, we tend to try to get rid of any potential stressors. Life always has a way of dishing them out anyway. But in general, like environmentally, we try to get rid of mild stressors, and on the other end of the spectrum, we don't tend to really trust that it's okay to lean into rest and play. You know, I can't tell you how many of my clients will talk to me about that. And they're like, I don't play. I don't know how to play anymore. I'm terrified of play.
Oh.
Yeah. And so and just connecting with so many people, I know that, you know, that they're not alone. And it's definitely a space I can relate to too. I can get totally over focused on work. And so being able to we talked about at one point, you were talking to me about that sort of winter hibernation phase. And I'm not sure which one of us said it, but we were talking about the courage that it takes to be able to trust in sort of the winter process in ourselves. Whether it's just like, I'm really tired, and instead of having this cup of coffee, I'm actually going to cancel things and I'm just going to go lie down for a couple of hours and then see what happens after that. Like that can take a tremendous amount of courage to do. The trusting in the intelligence of the way that our body's guiding us is actually to our benefit and to the benefit of the larger collective, versus kind of again, those narrative and frameworks that we've been given that are sometimes really scary, really terrifying, or just so pervasive that we don't know we're swimming in them, that can just kind of continue to drive a tendency for us to be so disconnected from the intelligence of our bodies. So Meghan and I we love this topic of conversation. We definitely can go on for a good long while, and we plan to in a few days, in a few
Exactly.
yes. But let's open it up and hear from some of you guys. Any thoughts or observations or insights that have come to you while we've been talking? Anything that you want to speak to? Bill, it looks like you popped in. Did you have something you wanted to share?
No.
No, did it just pick up on your voice maybe because of some background noise and maybe being muted? So, okay. Does somebody else have something they want to ask? As it relates to some of this beautiful way of moving through the world that bears embody?
I just practically, I'd love to know some more details of what you envision for a day in the workshop. Like what days or weeks or the days look like.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm definitely going to touch on that, and we might as well just touch on it right now. So yeah, the retreat is going to be in South Tahoe, and it's May 24th through the 28th. And we will be circling up, just pull the schedule up here in front of me. We're going to be meeting up at like a vacation rental home. It'll be a base for us to have our meals and conversations and facilitation together. But we're going to be starting on the 24th at 1 for lunch. And then once we kind of get through our introductions and overview, we're going to be spending quite a bit of time out, you know, in the forest and in the local landscapes and wandering and letting Meghan share her knowledge and experience of tracking to help us emerge into a very different, you know, way of spending our day. And so I'll just say that we will be sort of circling up early in the morning and having some breakfast together, and then hopping in a van together and taking a packed lunch with us and going out and spending time exploring and tracking together with Meghan. And then in the afternoon, yeah, at about 2 to 2:30 in the afternoon, we'll stop and we'll take a break. And this is just rest and playtime. We'll come back. Everybody can just relax and have some time to really see what your body is asking of you at that point. And then we'll circle back up together at 5:30 and have some time for discussion and a shared meal and shared stories, and, you know, spending some quality time together with each other in the evenings. So in terms of we we'll have that sort of central location where we'll be gathering and doing our meals together and discussions. And then lodging wise, there are a lot of lodging options in that area. There are a whole variety of different hotels and resorts and Airbnbs and camping sites and all kinds of things. So people can, choose what suits you the best. And then you receive the details on where we'll be meeting up for our meals and discussions at that central home as our base. Meghan, do you want to say, I can only imagine that people that are pondering this, that have maybe never been tracking before, or have never experienced any sort of interaction around bears. Can you speak to a little bit of what that's like? And also, if someone has a fear of being attacked by a bear or something like that.
Yeah. Sure. So after we gather and have breakfast, as Koelle said, we'll pop into a vehicle and we will go to a site that I have previously scouted over the past couple of days. And we're going to pick up on a bear trail or go to a place where there's a lot of bear sign. Bears have an amazing vocabulary of what they leave on the landscape, and we're going to just start diving into it. If we pick up on a fresh trail, and it feels that we're not going to be too intrusive on the animal, we'll follow it out. If we pick up on a day-old trail, we'll definitely get on it and follow it. And bears love to play. I mean, we're going to see lots of play activity. We may not see the bear that day or what, but we will certainly see sign of play. So just by following, we will get to see a lot of different kinds of behavior: feeding behavior, resting behavior, play behavior, tree climbing, babysitter trees, all kinds of stuff like that. We may also start and go into places and look at the bears that are right up in South Tahoe and look at their behavior versus going out into the national forest and looking at the different behaviors there. Because there's so many metaphors and things to learn about these bears that are more habituated and more rutted, and what their health looks like versus these more wild bears that have become are more innately who they are. And then there's certainly a lot of overlap between the two. So we may do a day or two of comparison. We're not going to be on any trails, so having good gear and walking shoes, things that you're comfortable in, is going to be really important. It will be low, ideally May. I can't say what's going on with the weather, but I will do my best. But ideally May in South Tahoe is an incredible time. It's spring, lots of feeding areas. We could get some, spring rain showers, but typically it's warm-ish, and we'll be anywhere between like 7,000 to 10,000 feet in elevation. But we'll be going slowly. This is not about marching. This is not boot camp. This is not outward bound, do your best kind of thing. It's about caring for yourself and learning from these bears how to do it. And you'll have day packs too, because we'll want you to have gear and layers and food and water while you're going.
Thanks, Meghan. Thomas, do you feel like that answered your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Other questions or comments or thoughts that come up for any of you? Including anything that's been shared that maybe you didn't know about bears, or, something that maybe has piqued your curiosity, or something you maybe want to think more about for yourself. Feel free to just anything that you want to bring to the conversation is welcome.
Hi. Yeah, I'm wondering if I could hear more about the bears giving birth when they're asleep.
Yes.
I was like, whoa.
Yeah, whoa, maybe that's the way to do it. So I'll just go through a year in a life of a mama bear. So come usually May, June, but it depends on where they are in the world. The female will go into estrus and she will start to ovulate, and she can ovulate, there's sometimes 5 cubs, but generally, sorry, she will put out about 2 eggs, and she may hook up with a couple different males. So she can actually be carrying fertilized eggs from different males. And they stay together for a short amount of time, and then they part their ways. And then her job is to feed like crazy, is to eat everything that she wants so that she can make it through her denning phase. So she's, moving around, taking in as many calories as she can. If it's not a good year of food, she will not, so bears do something called delayed implantation. So once those eggs are fertilized, they don't actually implant into her uterus. They're just floating around there. And she will carry those fertilized, or blastocysts, or she'll carry those fertilized eggs around with her until she and her body knows that she has enough calories to successfully carry them through pregnancy and to be able to nurse them the following year. If she doesn't get enough food, those fertilized eggs will just be reabsorbed by her. And she will go through and she won't have cubs. If it is a good food year, and often older mothers know how to find food better and are better mothers in general. So let's say these eggs implant into her, she will find a den site and she goes into the den. Bears don't do a true hibernation like groundhogs and squirrels and things do, chipmunks, frogs. They do a true hibernation, which is like a hibernating animal. Like I could grab a groundhog by its tail and swing it around and it's not going to wake up, right? I wouldn't do that, maybe, but the bears do something called torpor, where they basically just take really long, deep naps, but they can wake up instantly and be fully active. Hibernation takes time to come out of. So, but if you hear me say hibernation, just understand it's a little bit of a difference. So the bears go into torpor and they take these long, deep naps, and she's in her den taking this very, very long nap. And again, depending on where they are, it can be anywhere from like 3 months to 5 months. And she's in her den and she gives birth, and they come out and they're tiny. They're like this big while she's sleeping and in this torpor state. And they will crawl up her hairline and her belly line until they find a nipple. And then they will nurse off of her. And so this is just so lovely, and why it's so important to go into the cave, people. Go into the cave. We can break open the cave in a long time, but she's in the cave and the 3 of them are there sleeping together and feeding and growing. I mean, she's actually growing 2 more things. And so in her rest, there is so much life, and there's a lot about bears dreaming. There are stories about how bear dream creation, right? Because they are taking a rest and they have that creative ability when you rest. If you don't rest, there's no space for anything else to come in. The rest piece is essential, and bears are just the perfect metaphor for that. And they are teachers. I mean, they're beyond metaphor. They are the teachers for that. And then she comes out in spring, depending on where they are. Could be as early as March, could be as late as May. And she comes out and they've grown like twice the size, and they come out and they're about this big. They're still really tiny and cute. And then they're on the search for food, and she will nurse them for a whole nother year. But when they will start to learn to eat other foods, but she's starving. And so her whole deal is like, eat again, because she's now spent all that time in the den, not only nursing, but she doesn't feed or drink or defecate during those times that she's in the den. So her body is this kind of perfect being to be in a cave. So, did that answer? Is that good? Yeah, it's amazing. It's really good. And I just wanted to say, Koelle, there is an audaciousness and a courage that it takes to rest. I just recently came back from a 4.5 month road trip, and COVID is this opportunity. I mean, not that it hasn't been a challenge and a struggle, but it is also an opportunity to shift things. Here is this intermediate disturbance, or this disturbance. And I'm seeing a lot of our culture trying to go back to something that actually wasn't working. And so my husband and I were like, well, what are we doing right now? Things are still a little wonky. No, there's nothing set right now, right? Everything's still up in the air. And there's this time to offer yourselves to the courageousness of going into the cave and resting and realigning, and what will come out of this time for you. And it felt really audacious. I have a full work schedule. I have all kinds of things that I'm doing. And I was like, no, I'm leaving for 4.5 months. And basically went into a cave of my own, although we were moving around. And a lot of that stemmed from trauma that I had had from being in a car accident where I was the only one who survived and had no memory of it. And those memories started to come back in the beginning of 2021. And I needed that time to be able to integrate being the sole survivor of this car accident, of which my grandmother died, and other, in order to be able to move forward and not continue to be incapacitated by it, right? And it's scary as hell. And tracking bears might be really scary for you too. I've taken lots of people out and they're like, what are we doing? Like, this is really fresh bear. And when you start to build that relationship, whether it's with the bear or with yourself, because you've given yourself the opportunity to rest and do something different, it's incredible what comes out. And by allowing yourselves to do that, you're actually helping me, right? You're modeling good behavior for me. You're giving me the strength and courage to continue to do that. Like it, our Western modern humanity says that it's selfish or it's indulgent, and it's actually really not. It's actually very communally oriented, because I believe it is my responsibility to take the time to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to be doing instead of being on someone else's agenda, right? So I just wanted to offer that, like it's scary to go into a cave for 2 months, right? Or 4 months or whatever the time is. And it's so good when you get out of the cave too, right? They're both equally important.
I'm so glad that you bring that up. I think it's such a really, really important point. I had a client a few weeks ago who said to me, okay, I really want to lean into my creativity. Like I want to cultivate more creativity. How do I do that? I said, well, the first thing is going to be sorting out what you need to feel safe enough.
Yeah.
Rest. Because again, like culturally, we get this message of output, and more output. And the more output you can do, the better, the better you are, the better you're recognized. And as you said, that being able to have a really good quality, deep inhale and going into a space of, I don't know what's next, or I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know what I feel inspired to. But working out what you actually need to feel safe and supported to be able to go into that space, to be able to go into your own personal winter, your own personal cave. And sometimes it's just needed as an hour or two, or sometimes it's needed as a 4-month, a 4-month adventure. But I think learning to really appreciate the value of that. We're living through a time right now where we need innovation like we've never needed it in our lives, or probably in multiple lifetimes. We've got some really, really big, challenging problems to work our way through. And it's going to take incredibly courageous and creative thinking for everyone, about how we navigate our world and how we continue to shape it and what we do with the choices that we have in front of us. And in order to do that, it's not actually about working harder.
No, it's the opposite.
Yeah, it's having the courage to say, okay, this is really scary and I'm not really sure what the next step is. And I just feel a sense of overwhelm. So I'm going to gather up the people and the experiences and the places and the things that help me cocoon and feel a sense of safety, and essentially go into the underworld. I think, Meghan, for those of you that maybe haven't had a chance to listen to it, you'll see on the retreat website page a link to a little podcast interview that Meghan and I did about a month or so ago. And I was sharing in there that when I did this cochlear implant surgery recently, there was a period of 4 weeks where there was no ability to switch on the device. They had to let everything in the inside of the ear and the skull all heal up, so they couldn't switch on the implant. And it was 4 weeks of complete and utter silence. And that means like not hearing running water, or not hearing a door close, or not hearing a bird chirp, or your hands going down to nothing, absolutely nothing. So for some people, imagining that, it's like, oh my gosh, that would be terrifying to have zero sound stimulus of any kind. And for me, I quickly just reveled in it. It was like, wow, this is so deeply restful. My whole nervous system just kind of really became very, very, very still, because there wasn't any external stimulation. And of course I couldn't work during that time, so I had to cancel client sessions and retreat programs and things like that, and I had to take that break. And as I shared with you, Meghan, it was a time where each time I fell asleep, the volume of dreams that would come through, and, waking up with, at the end of the first 2 weeks, just my mind was exploding with new ideas and inspiration. And I was like, I'm going to, burst if I don't start writing some of this down. So that being able to trust that we can have experiences like that, and to trust in the intelligence of our bodies and that real need to cocoon. And so, for whatever it's worth, even if you're not joining us on this retreat, you might want to just potentially think about asking yourself, what do I need to feel safe enough to go into my own cave? And what kind of support structure do I need to set up that would make that okay? Is it getting permission from my friends and partners? Is it crafting up a really funny email response that just knows that that's gonna let people know what's going on and set up a boundary, but feel playful about it? Or is it knowing that you have a certain amount of financial resources set aside, that everything's going to be okay? You're not going to be eating cans of beans after you take a week off and rest. So just being curious about what you might actually need to feel safe enough, to feel that sense of safety and support, to lean into that can be a good place to start.
And be nice to yourself when you do it, because we're not used to taking care of ourselves. So all the voices are going to come up about what you're not doing correctly, or you're not enough, and just lots of self-love and compassion, because it takes a little bit of time to transition into like, yeah. So,
Really.
be nice.
Yes, I can't believe we're already at the top of the hour. Does anybody have any last questions or comments that you want to share before we wrap up today? I just want to switch this for a second into gallery view so I can see all of you more clearly. Beautiful. Okay.
Hi, Koelle, this is Dee Dee.
Oh, sorry, who did you say it was?
This is Dee Dee Dean. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Dee Dee?
Good. I think this is so fascinating. And I have to laugh because I retired from a job I was totally over 4 years ago. And I feel like I've been trying to get in this, stopping mode for 4 years, not 4 months. And I find this so refreshing that even though I haven't, there's so many things to do that you can do and that have caught my interest. And, there's just so many options and so many opportunities. And when you actually take the time to, like you said, get out of your regular routine, and I have found that there are so many. And then now coming upon this is, another amazing opportunity, you know, to do something. And I don't know. I still haven't found that thing that, you know, I want to do, but always looking. And I just wanted to thank you for all this amazing information. It's fascinating and very intriguing. So I appreciate it.
You're so welcome. I'm glad that, you know, the sharing resonates, and it's nice to know that we're not alone in our experiences. And please just know that we're cheering you on to continue to sit with those questions and to lean into your own phase of resting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for making this time to be with us today. This was super fun for Meghan and I to connect and to share with you and to talk about just the level of wisdom and insight that we can gain from our animal kin is really, to me, just the most delicious thing in the world to dive into. So thank you for joining us with that. And if you have any questions about the retreat, please don't hesitate to reach out. There's certainly the information that's posted there on the website on the retreat page, but also please feel free to just email. We're happy to hear from you and address any questions that you might have.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing and being here and being willing.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Meghan.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye.